I think there were not many people who understood just how broad his interests were and how supportive he was of an astonishingly wide range. That degree of continuity, when you're not going to be around all the time, that there are some periods when you need to have continuity.
There is a coincidence in Prince Philip's life that the closer one looks feels truly haunting. On April 9th, 1952, just 2 months after ascending the throne, Queen Elizabeth II signed an official declaration confirming that the royal family and her descendants would continue to bear the name Windsor. That might sound like a merely ceremonial decision, but for Philip it held a vastly different significance. After all, he had renounced his Greek and Danish titles, left his homeland changed, his religion, adopted British citizenship, and abandoned a career he loved, all to marry Elizabeth. Yet only a few years into their marriage, he discovered that he could not even pass his own name on to his own children. But here is the detail that makes it all so haunting. Exactly 69 years later, also on April 9th, Prince Philip passed away at Windsor Castle. A day that had once marked the moment his name was effectively sidelined from the royal family's future, became the day his own life came to an end. Was it merely a coincidence of the calendar? Or was it one of the bitterest ironies of the marriage between Elizabeth and Philip, a union that spanned more than 7 decades? For, behind the public image, a lasting royal marriage. 73 years together, thousands of public engagements, and a lifetime of devotion lay another layer of truth. A truth concerning power, identity, sacrifice, and things left unsaid in the public eye. And there are 2 details that will guide us through this story. The first is a document signed in April 1952. The second is a small ring on Prince Philip's hand, an object he is said to have worn for most of his life. 2 things that seem completely unrelated. Yet when viewed side by side, they reveal a very different perspective on the man who always stood behind the Queen. If you enjoy content that explores the royal family through often overlooked details, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future videos. And before we dive deeper, let me know where you're watching from: a bustling city, a small town, or the peaceful countryside. Please leave the name of your location in the comments. Because to understand why a surname could become such a deep wound for Prince Philip, we have to go back to a time long before Buckingham Palace, before Windsor, before Elizabeth became queen. And here we must look back to a time long before the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, before the ceremonial uniforms, and even before the years Philip spent walking a step behind the Queen. For before becoming the Duke of Edinburgh, Philip was a boy who knew little of what it meant to truly belong anywhere. He was born with the title of Prince of Greece and Denmark, yet that title brought him no stability in childhood. His family was forced to leave Greece when Philip was very young. From his earliest years, he grew accustomed to constant movement, staying in other people's homes and adapting to places that were never truly his own. His father, Prince Andrew, spent most of his time away from the family. His mother, Princess Alice, suffered a severe mental health crisis and required years of treatment. His sisters married one by one and moved to Germany. Consequently, Philip grew up moving between boarding schools, relatives, and family acquaintances who were willing to take him in during the holidays. A boy bearing the title of prince, yet without a permanent home. It was a paradox that would stay with Philip for most of his life. Then in 1937, another tragedy struck. His sister Cecile, who was pregnant at the time, was killed in a plane crash along with her husband and young children. Philip was just 16 years old. He had to travel to Germany for the funeral, walking behind his sister's coffin against the backdrop of a Europe sinking ever deeper into political tension. It was not merely a funeral, it was yet another instance of Philip witnessing a part of his family vanish. Perhaps that is why the few mementos remaining from his own family came to hold such profound significance for him later in life. In 1944, Philip's father passed away in Monte Carlo. What he left behind was neither a vast fortune nor a palace, just a few personal belongings, some papers, and a signet ring. Philip wore that ring for decades afterward. And looking back at his life as a whole, that small object became a symbol of something deeply personal, the part of Philip's identity that existed before Buckingham Palace, Windsor, or any other title came into the picture. Yet amidst that transient youth, someone began to appear in his life with increasing frequency. In 1939, at the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth, Philip met Princess Elizabeth again. Elizabeth was just 13. Philip was 18. Following that meeting, letters began to pass between them throughout the war years. And this is what elevated their relationship beyond a typical youthful romance. Elizabeth was not merely the girl Philip loved. For someone who had spent most of his childhood moving from place to place, she gradually became something Philip had almost never known. An anchor, someone who was always there, an address to write to, a place he could envision returning to. And given Philip's lack of a sense of belonging during his youth, we can understand the magnitude of what he was willing to give up later on to marry Elizabeth. For when someone has spent their entire childhood searching for a place to belong, they may be willing to pay a very high price to finally be able to stay. As Elizabeth gradually became a rare constant in Philip's life, he came to realize that love alone was not enough to truly enter her world. Philip had to shed almost every aspect of the identity he had held since birth. He renounced his titles as Prince of Greece and Denmark. He gave up his claim to the Greek throne. He left the Greek Orthodox Church to join the Church of England. He became a British citizen. And then he needed a new surname. The name chosen was Mountbatten. Yet even that surname carried a certain irony. Mountbatten was the anglicized version of Battenberg, his mother's family name, which had been changed during World War I when its German sound became a liability in Britain. In other words, a man who had been born without a surname in the traditional European royal sense was now adopting a name that his own family had previously altered to fit into British life. It was a profound transformation. Philip was doing more than just preparing to marry Elizabeth. He was gradually leaving behind the person he once was to step into an institution far greater than himself. On November 20, 1947, they were married at Westminster Abbey. Elizabeth was surrounded by her family, the royal court dignitaries, and a system that had endured for generations. Philip's side of the aisle, however, presented a starkly different picture. His sisters were absent largely due to their ties to Germany, given that the wedding took place just 2 years after the end of World War II. Amidst the thousands of people inside Westminster Abbey, one figure stood out in particular. Philip's mother, Princess Alice, sat almost alone in the groom's family pews. To the public, it was a magnificent royal wedding. Yet, from Philip's perspective, it was also the moment a man stepped into a colossal family, while his own family could barely stand by his side. However, amidst all the loss and change, Philip enjoyed a period of time he had likely long yearned for. From 1949 to 1951, Philip served in the Navy in Malta. Elizabeth would come to live with him for periods at a time. There she was, not yet queen. Philip was not yet the man required to walk 2 paces behind the sovereign. They could live more like an ordinary couple than at any other time in their future. Elizabeth could enjoy greater freedom. Philip had a job of his own. He had rank responsibilities, comrades, and a career path forged by his own merit. And most importantly, they had a home that for a brief time did not belong entirely to the monarchy. After a childhood spent constantly moving from place to place, Philip finally seemed to possess the very things he had once lacked. A wife he loved, a career he took pride in, a small family, and a place to call home. Perhaps that is why, in retrospect, the Malta years hold a beauty that is almost painful. For Philip did not know that those years of freedom were numbered, that the work he loved was drawing to a close, that the home he wished to build would no longer be his to shape, and that his place within his own family was about to be defined by people sitting in rooms he had no right to enter. Philip finally had a career, a home, and the wife he loved, but all of that was about to change in a single morning in Kenya. And then that morning arrived. Not at Buckingham Palace, not in a room filled with officials, but in Kenya in February 1952. Elizabeth and Philip were on a tour representing King George VI when the news arrived from Britain. The king had passed away at Sandringham. Philip was among the first in the party to be informed, and he had to break the news to Elizabeth himself. In that very moment, the woman he loved was no longer just his wife. She became the sovereign, and Philip was no longer simply a naval officer, a husband, or a young father. His role changed instantly. From that day on, all protocol revolved around the queen. Philip had to walk behind her. Royal decisions passed through her secretaries. The red boxes belonged to her. The power of the monarchy rested with her. Meanwhile, Philip had to carve out an entirely new place for himself beside the throne. The most painful part was that he was only about 30 years old. He had just begun a genuine naval career. He had gained command experience. He had a path to rise through his own merit. But after Elizabeth became Queen, Philip never returned to that life. The naval career he had built step by step came to a virtual standstill right there. Just think about it for a moment. Philip had spent less than a third of his life becoming a naval officer. He then spent the remaining 7 decades in a role for which no military academy had ever trained him. Not the leader, not the final decision-maker, but the one who had to be ever-present, precise, and loyal, and who often had to stand in the background. Yet those changes went far beyond mere protocol. They began to settle into their own private life as a couple. Before Elizabeth ascended the throne, the family lived at Clarence House. Philip had poured a great deal of effort into the place. He was involved in the renovations and the selection of details, transforming it into a space where the young family could truly live. After a childhood spent constantly staying in other people's homes, Clarence House held a very different significance for him. It was not merely a residence. It was a place where Philip began to leave his own personal mark. But with a new queen, the establishment took a completely different view. Buckingham Palace was the proper place for the sovereign to reside. Philip objected. He believed Clarence House was better suited to family life. Buckingham Palace was too vast, too rigid, and felt more like an institution than a home. But this time, Philip's opinion did not prevail. The establishment wanted the move. The government supported the move. And ultimately, the family moved into Buckingham Palace. Philip lost that argument. Once again, a matter that seemed deeply personal, where a husband wished to live with his wife and children was no longer the family's decision alone. It became a matter for the institution. And this was the first sign of a reality Philip would have to live with for years to come. When his wife became queen, the boundary between marriage and the crown all but vanished. Yet Philip still believed there was at least one thing that belonged to him: his name, the name his children could bear. And just a few weeks later, even that was about to be taken from him. And then the one thing Philip still considered his own, his family name, became a subject of debate. It did not happen in the couple's private sitting room. It did not happen during a private conversation between Philip and Elizabeth. Instead, it played out in the rooms where advisors, officials, and the guardians of dynastic continuity decided what was best for the crown. It all began with a remark attributed to Lord Louis Mountbatten, the uncle who had played such an influential role in Philip's life. After Elizabeth ascended the throne, Mountbatten reportedly declared, "The House of Mountbatten now reigns." That single sentence was enough to turn the question of the family name into a sensitive issue. Word quickly reached Queen Mary, Elizabeth's grandmother. Her reaction was fierce. Queen Mary had personally witnessed a previous crisis regarding the British royal family's name. During the First World War, the German-sounding name Saxe-Coburg and Gotha had become a serious political liability. In 1917, the royal family changed its name to Windsor to align with public sentiment during wartime. To Queen Mary, Windsor was far more than just a surname. It was bound up with the very survival of the monarchy during a period of extreme instability. Consequently, the notion that Mountbatten might replace Windsor quickly escalated beyond the confines of the family. The matter was brought to Winston Churchill's government. And this was precisely what made the situation so deeply painful for Philip. His family name was being debated. The name his children might bear was being decided. Yet Philip had virtually no control over the discussion. Others were talking about it. Others were weighing the consequences. Others were balancing tradition, politics, and the image of the crown. Yet the person whose name lay at the very heart of the matter remained in a sense on the outside. On April 9, 1952, the decision was formalized. Elizabeth declared that she and her children would continue to be known as the House and Family of Windsor, and that the name Windsor would remain attached to the dynasty. Just one document, just one signature. But for Philip, the significance ran far deeper than mere protocol. For he had already renounced his former titles. He had changed his nationality. He had adopted a new surname. He had left his naval career behind. He had accepted walking a step behind his wife in matters of protocol. And now he realized that even his name would not simply be passed down to Charles and Anne as he had once envisioned. Then came the famous words attributed to Philip: "I am nothing but a bloody amoeba." And even more painfully, "I am the only man in the country not allowed to give his name to his own children." Yet one crucial point must be understood. Elizabeth should not be cast as someone who deliberately sought to humiliate her husband. She was only 25 years old. She had ascended the throne just 2 months prior. Behind her stood Queen Mary Churchill's government, her advisors, and the immense weight of an institution that prioritized the stability of the crown over individual desires. Elizabeth may well have had little room for choice, but that did not diminish the impact on Philip. And perhaps that was the bitterest part of all. No infidelity was required, no furious argument, no doors slammed shut. Sometimes what alters a person standing within their own family is nothing more than a sheet of paper signed in silence. And less than 14 months later, Philip would walk into Westminster Abbey, kneel before his own wife in the presence of millions, and perform a rite that made all that sacrifice more palpable than ever. Then, more than a year after the events of 1952, Philip faced a moment that, to an outside observer, might have appeared to be an act of absolute devotion. Yet viewed in the context of all that had recently transpired, the scene took on a vastly different meaning. On June 2, 1953, Westminster Abbey was packed. Elizabeth was crowned. She received the crown. She sat upon the throne. She became the focal point of the entire ceremony. Philip, however, was not crowned alongside his wife. Such was the rule of the monarchy. The husband of a reigning queen does not become king simply by virtue of marriage. Philip understood this. He did not enter the abbey expecting to share the throne. But then came the act of homage. And Philip was the first to step forward. He walked toward the queen. He knelt before her. He placed himself in the position of a subject before the sovereign. He swore an oath of allegiance. Then rising, he touched the crown, kissed Elizabeth on the cheek, and backed down the steps, for in royal protocol one never turns one's back on the sovereign. Every movement was precise. No hesitation, no faltering. Not a trace of resentment was revealed. And that was the first layer of the moment. Perfect devotion, a husband publicly swearing allegiance to the wife who had just become queen. An image easily perceived as a symbol of love, discipline, and duty. But it was the second layer that gave the moment its heavy significance. Just over a year earlier, Philip had learned that his surname would not automatically be passed on to Charles and Anne. He had lost control over where his family lived. He had left his naval career behind. And now, before millions of onlookers, he knelt before the woman he loved and formally acknowledged his place beneath the crown. Perhaps that is the most puzzling thing about Philip. He did not rebel. He did not walk away. He did not turn his frustration into a public battle. He did exactly what the role demanded. And he did it so well that the public barely saw the personal cost involved. Yet the paradox did not end there. When he married Elizabeth in 1947, Philip relinquished his title as Prince of Greece and Denmark. However, he did not immediately become a Prince of the United Kingdom. He was the Duke of Edinburgh, the Queen's husband, the father of the heir to the throne. But the title of Prince of the United Kingdom was not officially conferred upon him until 1957, nearly a decade after the wedding. That span of time might seem like a mere detail regarding titles. But emotionally, it reflected the peculiar position Philip had to inhabit. He had given up the title he was born with. Yet the equivalent title in his new family did not come immediately. He was within the royal family, yet at times treated as an outsider on the fringes of that very structure. Then in 1960, a significant change finally arrived. Elizabeth issued a decision allowing certain descendants, those not holding royal styles and titles, to use the surname Mountbatten-Windsor. The name Mountbatten finally entered the family's official records. But it was not a complete reversal of the 1952 decision. Charles and Anne, the two children at the heart of the initial controversy, did not simply adopt the Mountbatten-Windsor name as Philip had once desired. It was a compromise, an adjustment, perhaps a way for Elizabeth to try and strike a balance between the crown and her husband. But what had happened in 1952 did not simply vanish. And then years later, a small moment arrived. Not during a Privy Council meeting, not through a government declaration, but at a wedding. On November 14, 1973, Princess Anne married Mark Phillips at Westminster Abbey. When signing the register, she used the name Anna Mountbatten-Windsor, just a few words on a page. Philip was standing right there. And if the document from 1952 had symbolized something taken away from him, then Anne's signature more than 2 decades later felt like a tiny piece being restored. Not a total victory, not an apology, but the first time Philip's family name appeared in a public and meaningful way on a document directly linked to his own daughter. A small victory. Late in coming, very late. But perhaps it was precisely because it came so late that it held deeper significance. For Philip had spent years learning how to exist within an institution that did not always make room for him. And it was that very experience that would later allow him to quickly recognize what was happening when another young person entered that same world. Her name was Diana, and precisely because Philip had spent so many years learning how to survive within an institution not built for him, he likely recognized that feeling immediately when Diana Spencer entered the royal family. Diana was much younger than him, Their circumstances were entirely different. Yet there was a clear commonality. Both were outsiders stepping into a system that had existed long before their arrival. A system with its own rituals, its own language, its own hierarchy, and countless unwritten rules understood from childhood by those born into it, but not by them. Philip did not know them. Neither did Diana. Philip had to learn where to stand, whom to walk behind, when to speak, when to remain silent, and what parts of his life could truly remain his own. Decades later, Diana entered that same world at the age of 19. She too had to learn how to dress appear, in public speak, and conduct herself under the scrutiny of a machine that always prioritized the crown over the individual. That is not to say Philip and Diana always understood one another. In reality, their relationship was far more complex. But when the marriage between Charles and Diana began to fracture severely, Philip was one of the few senior family members who actually wrote directly to Diana. Those letters were described as lengthy and at times carefully measured. Philip sought to understand what was happening. He offered advice. He tried to salvage a marriage that was spiraling out of control. And for a time, Diana responded. However, one should not romanticize this into a perfect relationship. As the crisis deepened, correspondence became increasingly difficult. Philip had his limits. He was Charles's father. He held a firm belief in duty. And when he felt Diana's actions were harming his son or the royal family, his tone would harden. Yet the fact remains that he wrote to her. He attempted a dialogue. Perhaps because more than many others in the palace, Philip understood what it felt like to have one's identity redefined piece by piece by a system far larger than oneself. Then came 1997, and all those tensions suddenly paled in comparison to a far greater tragedy. Diana died. William was just 15. Harry was only 12. In the days of mourning that followed, a question arose: should the two boys walk behind their mother's coffin through streets packed with people? To the adults, it was a matter of public protocol. To William and Harry, it was their mother. And according to accounts from that time, Philip said something very simple to William. In essence, "If I walk with you, would you be willing to go?" Philip then joined the funeral procession. He walked alongside Charles, William, Harry, and Earl Spencer behind Diana's coffin. Viewed in isolation, that moment might simply appear to be a grandfather supporting his grandsons. But when placed against the backdrop of Philip's entire life, the significance runs deeper. Here was a man who had entered the royal family from the outside, who had to learn rules he hadn't created himself, who had lost his career, surrendered control over many private matters, and repeatedly had to find his footing in the role the institution demanded of him. A man who knew all too well the feeling of standing alone in a space where everyone else seemed to know exactly what to do. And at the age of 76, he saw a 15-year-old boy about to walk across London under the gaze of millions. This time, Philip could do something different. He could walk alongside him. Perhaps that was one of the moments that most clearly revealed how Philip had dealt with his own traumas. He could not change what had happened to him in 1952, but he could use that experience to ensure that on one of the most difficult days of William's life, the boy would not have to walk alone. And years later, when Philip finally stepped away from public duties, he too began to seek something he had rarely known throughout his life. A place free from crowds devoid of protocol, and where no one demanded he stand in a specific spot. And then, after decades spent amidst protocol schedules, thousands of handshakes and countless rooms, where he had to constantly remember exactly where to stand, Philip finally entered a very different phase of his life. In 2017, at the age of 96, he officially stepped back from the majority of his public duties. No more packed schedules. No more back-to-back public appearances. No more need to always be present at the right time, in the right spot, observing the right protocol. Philip began spending most of his time at Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate, and the difference was striking. Wood Farm was not Buckingham Palace. It was not a symbol of power. It was not a place designed to overwhelm. There were fewer staff members. The space was smaller. The pace of life was slower. Philip could read. He could paint. He could spend time carriage driving. He could walk outdoors without turning every step into a ceremonial act. And this led to a question that lingered with him during his final years. Did Philip leave the rhythm of palace life because he still harbored resentment? Or was the reason far simpler? At 96, after nearly 7 decades of living for duty, did he finally have the right to choose where he wanted to wake up each morning? We may never know the exact answer. Philip was not the sort of man to frequently explain his feelings in public. He belonged to a generation that viewed silence as a form of discipline. Yet sometimes the choices a person makes at the end of life speak volumes far more than any interview ever could. He did not seek another palace. He did not demand more power. He did not attempt to build a personal power base. He chose a farmhouse, a smaller home, a wider expanse of sky, and a place where he could simply be himself. Then came April 9th, 2021. Prince Philip passed away at Windsor Castle at the age of 99. And here, a detail from the beginning of the video resurfaces. April 952, the day Elizabeth issued the declaration retaining the name Windsor for the royal family and their descendants. April 9, 2021, the day Philip died. Two dates exactly 69 years apart. There is no evidence to suggest that this coincidence held any significance intentionally ascribed to it by either Philip or Elizabeth. Yet, on a human level, it is hard not to feel the weight of placing these two dates side by side. One day marked by a decision regarding identity. One day marking the end of the life of a man who had spent most of his years adapting to the identity the institution assigned to him. And then came the funeral at St. George's Chapel. With pandemic restrictions on gatherings still in effect, only a handful of people were permitted to attend. Inside a chapel capable of holding hundreds, Elizabeth sat alone. Not the queen surrounded by courtiers, not the sovereign at the center of a grand ceremony. Simply a 94-year-old woman in black, sitting apart from others, bidding farewell to the husband who had been by her side for over 73 years. And in that moment, almost everything that had once complicated their lives seemed insignificant. Windsor or Mountbatten? Who walked ahead? Who followed behind? Who wore the crown? Who held which title? Who won a palace argument? All of it faded into the background. For ultimately, power cannot halt the passage of time. Titles cannot make a person stay, and even a monarchy that has endured for centuries cannot shield a person from the most personal of losses. After Philip's passing, Princess Anne spoke about her father's final years. She dismissed the notion that his move to Wood Farm was merely an expression of dissatisfaction with Elizabeth. As Anne described it, Philip was simply growing old. He wanted a place where he could roam the farm without constantly being noticed approached or required to perform public duties. And perhaps that perspective allows us to view Philip's entire life in a different light. The greatest lesson may not lie in what he lost, but rather in what he did in the wake of those losses. Philip lost his homeland at a young age, yet he succeeded in building a family. He lost the naval career he loved, yet found a new role and fulfilled it for decades. He once felt his name was excluded from the family, yet he later used that very experience of being an outsider to understand and support the younger generation. He could not control every circumstance, but he could control how he rose again after them. And that is perhaps the greatest legacy of his life. We do not always get to choose what happens to us. Sacrifice is not always immediately acknowledged. Not every wound receives an apology. Yet one can still choose to maintain one's dignity. Choose to keep loving. Choose to use one's own past hardships to make the path less lonely for those who follow. Philip spent most of his life standing 2 steps behind a queen. But perhaps what he sought at the end of his life was never to step ahead of her. Not power, not retribution. It wasn't about winning an argument that had begun back in 1952. Perhaps he simply wanted something far less complicated, a field where for the first time in decades no one told him where to stand. And sometimes freedom isn't about having power over everyone else. Freedom is simply getting to live a single day exactly the way you choose. What about you? After everything Philip went through, do you think he truly forgave the decision made in 1952, or did he simply learn to live with it? Because sometimes the most memorable thing about a person isn't what they were given, but how they went on living after what had been taken from them. If you find Prince Philip's journey worth revisiting from a different perspective, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future royal analyses. And I'd really love to know, where are you watching this video? From a big city, a small town, or a quiet rural area? Please leave your location in the comments section. Finally, what do you think? Did Prince Philip truly forgive the decision made in 1952, or did he simply learn to live with it for the rest of his life?